everyone, and welcome to So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games. I'm your co-host, the man with the face for radio and the voice for podcasting, Mark Bigney, and with me is The Big Show, Michael Walker. How you doing, Walker?
Fantastic, Mark. How have you done this week?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little bit nervous. My car's at the body shop. People are not being supportive. Some of the people not being supportive are people I regularly drive to and from gaming events, so you'd figure they'd be a little bit sympathetic, but no. But we're going to talk about board games this week.
Ungrateful.
It's true. We're going to talk about the game we reviewed last year in our as-yet unnamed retrospective intro segment, the AYURIS. We're going to talk about the games we played last week. We're going to talk about the news and why it doesn't matter. And then finally, we're going to close it out with our topic, which is tricky edge cases. Those weird little bits of the rules that you're going to need to know sometimes, but not often, and so you never really know it when you need to know it.
Oh, I thought it was those rules used by the edgelords.
That too, actually. It's roughly the same category. So, Walker, what did we review last year?
Exactly 1 year ago, we reviewed a game called Barcelona, and just recently, we played Barcelona again with the new expansion that it got.
It's true. Barcelona is by Dani Garcia. Dani Garcia has been pretty prolific the past couple of years, and he does kind of middleweight Euros. Sometimes I think his work is more innovative than others, so Barcelona is pretty standard combo-tastic kind of Euro stuff, but I'm a bigger fan of Arborea. I'm perfectly willing to play Barcelona, but Arborea at least had this clever element of worker timing, of the workers staying on this conveyor belt and getting more and more effective as time goes on. There were these timing issues. And then Windmill Valley, which I recently tried, and I confess I was a little bit disappointed by based on your high praise. So Dani Garcia is a very capable designer, and I'm perfectly willing to play any of his existing designs or upcoming designs. But as I say, sometimes it's more to my taste than others. And I can't remember exactly what your thought was on the expansion to Barcelona, Walker. Why don't you refresh me?
I was good. I think it just added yet another element, something more you could do. And after playing it, it felt as though it needed it. With our recent past plays, it didn't seem as though it was lacking anything significant. But now with the expansion added, I don't think I'd ever play without it. Yeah,
there was this street element, and the dice were walking past each other and waving at each other. I remember it being somewhat strange.
Strange, but interesting.
Okay. So that's Barcelona by Dani Garcia, published by Board&Dice, originally in 2023, with the expansion A New Lease on Life, certainly as far as Walker is concerned. We now move on to the games we played last week. Walker, what did you play last week?
Mark, you were nice enough to show me a game called Snapships. This is designed by Joss Derksen and published by Snapships.
So this is Snapships Tactics, the board gamification of an existing toy line of Snapships. Joss Derksen actually is a Canadian who works at Lindvander Studios. He was involved in a very famous, very influential fan campaign for the X-Wing miniatures game back when that was a thing.
And there was another game that I played and purchased and was part of. This is the Star Wars Tactics game, which was a very similar thing, a toy that doubled as a game, which was very interesting.
Gotta love them toys. So what did you think of Snapships Tactics?
I thought it was fantastic. It sort of combined that sort of toy Lego element of, build your ship how you want it to look and, totally modular and whatever, and then had a very solid, straightforward game element to it. I think the marriage was perfect. It had just the amount of complexity that I would want in that type of system and or game.
I agree. If the building were significantly more complicated or time-consuming, or if the game itself were significantly more complicated or time-consuming, then you wouldn't necessarily get an ideal session. An ideal session for me of Snapships Tactics is indeed you build your bespoke starships, probably one or two-ish, and then you build them with the included components, and there's a large amount of both cosmetic and functional variety you can get out of the base game and the existing product lines. I have everything that's been published. When it was initially published and the Kickstarter was fulfilled, I was concerned that this was purely a way to clear out old stock, that this was not going to be an ongoing product line. But with the new expansion that we tried, the Swarm Box, it introduced new game elements and new toy elements designed specifically for the game. And so that indicates that there's at least up to this point some degree of support and willingness to continue it. And on top of the fact that you've got all these components that you build, and you make it WYSIWYG not so that your opponent can know what's up, but just because that's how it's cool. And there are... you mentioned the Star Wars: A Tactics game. If I recall, it had spring-loaded weapons, like the kind that are largely banned because some kid got blinded somewhere. And Snapship's Tactics has a bunch of spring-loaded weapons as well. There's this disc launcher that's surprisingly cool, and all these other things. We didn't build any of those, frankly. But in hindsight, maybe we ought to have. It's a whole scene. The other advantage of the swarms is that the intention when playing Snapship's Tactics, unlike, say, X-Wing or a lot of those other games, you're not expected to bring 4, 5, 6, 7 ships to a side. For one thing, the ships are big. They're very, very sizable. The movement template is very, very small because most of the movement you get is actually through the width of the base. But the Swarm box introduces drones. And so for an intro game, one sizable ship and a drone is just about perfect. Then you get the dynamics of managing multiple ships. The drones can still be customized, but the horizon for customization is significantly lower, and so the burden is lower. And so it makes it a very, very easy intro to a more fulsome game experience. And also, it's just a great way to just tack on a little bit more flexibility in terms of the building. So you could give someone 10 points to build. That could be 2 size 5 ships. It could be a couple size 4 and a drone. I mean, the world's your oyster. It just really blows up the design space a little bit just by having these size 2 ships that you can tack on. And I very much appreciated that. And that's exactly what we did. We had a larger ship and a drone, and got to do a certain amount of coordination with the tactics. Like, for example, my drone could vent heat and energy from its allied ship if it was close enough, and so there was a reason to keep them clustered, and it was able to pull off the burden. I will say that one disappointment I have with Snapship's Tactics is that the damage thresholds are such that it leads to a game being determined by some fluky rules. Like, if your big ship has, say, 13 hull points, as was the case in our session, and you have some weapons that might do 0, 3, or 6 points of damage in a single attack, that's a small volume of dice and a large fluctuation in terms of actual damage. And in an ideal world, I would rather that not be the case.
Sure, I love the fact that there's actual strategies. When you build your ships, right, you can go for, like, the heavy armor, or you can go for ramming like I did, and all these strategies work, like, actually come to fruition in the game. It's not just like this lost fallacy of, it'd be cool if this actually worked.
It's not like Jade is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah,
things that actually work.
It's a good balance in terms of the number of toys and bonuses. You're not apt to completely forget how they work or that they exist, but at the same time, you get to express a certain degree of personalization in terms of your ship. I very much appreciated building my ship. I built the components purely based on the things that I wanted them to do, and then I built the ship WYSIWYG, and it was hideous, but hideous in a very ungainly kind of practical way. You, on the other hand, tell me frankly, you took the massive blade wings. How much of it was because you wanted to ram things, and how much of it was cosmetic?
I think it was 50-50.
Fair enough. That's entirely reasonable. The blade wings do look amazing. I'm a huge fan of the product line. I like the building part. I like the playing part. I don't know if I'd be super enthusiastic about either of them disjointed from the whole, but all told, it's a great little toyetic hobby experience, and I'm very pleased that they've continued to support the product line. So if you have backed the Snapship's Tactics Kickstarter campaign, or if you have the aftermarket retail stuff, I don't think there were any Kickstarter exclusives past a very small number of cards. You can get the Swarm box from retail sources, and as I say, it gives you a surprisingly robust amount of additional customization options by virtue of having those low-cost chips.
And I think if you have children, this is a great idea as well, because like I said, there's a very big Lego part of it. There's very 100%. Much a sit down and build and have fun, and then you can say, hey, we could play a game with this, and you could go very light on the rules depending on their age, and then you can
I don't know. Would a child be willing to put up with building restrictions? So I guess this is a way to say that I shouldn't be playing with children, because the kid's going to look and say, "I want to put these parts on." It's like, well, no, little Timmy, that ship doesn't have that many customization slots, so you don't get to use these.
No, Mark, you let them do whatever they want.
Yeah, I think that's why I sometimes don't get on with kids. So. That is Snapship's Tactics, specifically the Swarm box. The Swarm box was released this year. All of the product line has been designed by Josh Derksen, published by Snapships. Got to play a game called Battle of Mekaverse. So I talked a little bit about this in an episode of Bloat not too long ago. So Kids Logic is a, frankly, occasionally dodgy Hong Kong company. I say dodgy because they've got a couple of outstanding Kickstarters that do not look like they're going to fulfill. One of them for a Dragon Ball miniatures game and one of them for a Macross miniatures game. I exerted the necessary foresight not to back the Macross miniatures game, and I'm very happy I didn't, because that looks to be a huge thing.
It was a huge thing. I remember it.
Yeah. But Battle of Mekaverse is a board game that they published under their board game publishing arm, which so far has released 2 products that I am interested in. There's an Ultraman thing that I don't really care about, and there was another Dragon Ball thing. I confess I'm not particularly interested in Dragon Ball or many of the works of Akira Toriyama more broadly. But Battle of Mekaverse, I didn't know anything about it, and there wasn't a whole lot of information about it available on Board Game Geek. And when the product was initially available for sale, there wasn't even an entry for it on Board Game Geek. But eventually a very small amount of information trickled in. And I discovered that it is a redesign of Clash of the Gladiators, a Handsome Gluck design from 2002 by Reiner Knizia. And you and I both like Clash of the Gladiators for years. Amongst the Knizia fan base, Clash of the Gladiators was typically the game that you pointed to and say, well, not everything the Doctor does can be good. But we like Clash of the Gladiators. It's a pretty good dice game. You draft teams of gladiators, and they have special abilities.
Yeah, like netters and spears, and you know, depending on the combination you'd have, you'd try to maneuver yourself against certain other groups. It was neat.
Well, now it's a mech game. It's got these chibi little mechs, and every mech gets 4 components on it. So rather than a clean team of 4 gladiators, it's a mech with 4 components. And the number of components, compared to the number of different types of gladiators, has ballooned considerably. Now there's about a dozen different special things that you can attach onto your mech, and they lead to a variety of very interesting effects. Some of them are relatively standard. So, for example, the swordman in Clash of the Gladiators would contribute 1 die towards the attack of that unit. And sure enough, there are lasers that you can attach to your mech, and they contribute 1 die to the attack. But additionally, there's some very straightforward things, like this will contribute 2 dice to your attack if you are adjacent to your target, or another component that contributes 2 dice to your attack if you are not adjacent to the target. Reasonably straightforward. Then you get to slightly more complicated stuff, like one-time use only shields that block all damage, which occasionally have a semi-degenerate effect on the gameplay, because points are purely based on kills. Not a huge fan of that particular component, but whatever. It adds to your options. Then there's another one-time component that just says, you get to roll 6 dice in this attack, whatever else. This is the big bomb. Louis loved the big bombs. He was a big fan of those.
See, this you can't see it at home, because this is an audio podcast. But there is such a look of surprise on my face that Louis liked the big bomb.
Absolutely. Then there was some truly interesting stuff, like the booster that said, when you move your mech, you're not limited to the normal 4 spaces. Just move wherever you want and then inflict an automatic hit before the fight starts. This seems overpowered, but it's not. It actually shakes out to be relatively well balanced in the universe of effects. This is hardly too surprising, because the different gladiator teams in Clash of the Gladiators, there was room for a plurality of different teams and letting them have different targets against which they could shine. And so I was expecting that. That was kind of table stakes for my expectations of Battle of Mekaverse. And sure enough, that was the case. We saw lots of different kinds of mech designs. Sometimes there were specific targets they really didn't want to mess with because it wasn't to their advantage. But other times there were great targets where your suite of upgrades was exactly the kind of thing to defeat their suite of upgrades. And it was very enjoyable. It was a shockingly interesting redesign. The map is entirely different. Rather than a small map with a small number of hexes, it's now a larger grid map with different terrain modifiers and effects. And on top of that, as I said, you have so many more things that you can kit out your mechs with. The universe is entirely generic. The art is entirely generic. But in terms of a redevelopment of a design I already liked, I thought that Battle of Mekaverse was very enjoyable. Is it worth paying shipping from Hong Kong? No, not at all. But that is the kind of thing that you pay us the big bucks for. We are willing to take that hit, and I'll pay that $80 shipping charge for a medium box game. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it for you. I do it for you, listeners. For you. And for the chibi little mechs, I guess. So we had a good time. Certainly not particularly deep. Certainly not replete with long-term strategic decision-making, but good for a laugh, a satisfying dice game, a little bit more substantial than some of the other Reiner Knizia dice games, like, for example, Llama Dice, which is just purely a dice game. But Battle of Mekaverse is an example of how to elaborate a dice game well. And this is the kind of stuff that Knizia has been doing for decades, even before roll and writes were de rigueur. So I was a big fan of Battle of Mekaverse, but I was expecting it to be pretty good, and I was pleasantly surprised. That's Battle of Mekaverse, published by Kids Logic, 2024.
I got to play Everdell Farshore, and we streamed it this Saturday. This is designed by James A. Wilson and Clarissa A. Wilson, put out by Starling Games, and this is a new standalone in the Everdell world. So, Mark Farshore, apparently if you travel south in Everdell, you'll come upon
Is it close
the
by?
Farshore.
Is it a little jaunt? Short trip?
Yeah, just, a little jaunt, as they'd say.
Okay.
Anyway, it plays almost identical to Everdell. They unfortunately took out the one thing I enjoyed about Everdell.
Squishy berries?
No, the synergy between the cards. No longer do you need a particular place matched up with a particular animal. Now you get 4 anchors, and the cards are color-coded now. So some cards are green, some are orange, some are gray. And now you can spend one of these anchors in order to put an animal out for free, as long as you already have a building of the same color. Throw the anchor on the building, can no longer use that building for that particular thing anymore.
That doesn't sound as interesting.
Agreed.
Okay.
I totally agree. I really like that. Some people might have found it limiting or, lucky for people to get cards that they needed and you never did or whatever. But I just always found it very interesting because it had the theme. It was that particular animal made sense to go in that building, and it was very charming that way. Now, not so much. Now it's very much you're building an engine. And some things are still interesting where, I don't know if you remember in Everdell, where you could go on to different seasons before the other people did.
Yes.
Because your summer started, or your winter started, while someone was still in summer, because that made sense.
I still maintain that's not how seasons work, but sure.
But, this is Everdell, Things work different there. Because it's very much what I call the Gaia Project effect. You try to keep in the round longer than other people because you're using your resources differently. So you have 2 workers to start, then you get 3, then you get 4 as you go through the different seasons, and you try to get resources to buy cards to improve your engine, because when you switch seasons on all but one of the seasons, you get to run your sort of harvest cards that get you more resources that will let you buy more cards. You can have a total of 15 cards.
So there's still a solid tableau building element. It's just they tweaked the parameters of it a bit.
Yeah, they have this boat system now where you move along this track along the outside. So 60 points is the most you can get through points during the game. There are some outlying cards that get you actual victory point tokens, but the rest are going to... The big amount of points that I got were these sort of goal tokens that you're going for. It's like, I have this many symbols in my tableau. I can use one of my workers to go to this area.
Oh, like Bunny Kingdom.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely like Bunny Kingdom. It was 60 points to end the game, and the winning score was 166 points.
Okay.
So, yes.
Sounds like Everdell Farshore is right up your alley, then.
They're not hidden, though. You can totally see the person taking these tokens. And they're, it's number of tokens times the number that is on it. So the very first people to get these tokens, they'll get a 2, and then the rest are 1s, right? So you add up all the numbers and then times it by the number of tokens, you'll get that many points. But anyway, in all, it is fine, much like Everdell was. Nice art, interesting, but, place workers, get resources, buy cards.
Are there still bouncy berries, though?
No.
Sounds like there's no reason to play
weird
Everdell
squishy kelp.
Squishy kelp?
It's like flat, squishy kelp.
That sounds super gross.
And driftwood.
Words keep getting more gross,
and
Walker.
Sea stones. Yeah, it's a thing.
Okay. I'm picking up on a subtle nautical vibe.
Yeah, Farshore, there you go.
Sure.
Anchors, boats, all sorts of stuff like that.
Anthropomorphic animals?
I don't see a reason why you'd want to get, if you already had Everdell, I don't see a reason that you'd want to get offshore. But if you don't have any Everdell and it's something that's up your alley and you want a large tableau building, worker placement type game, then maybe Farshores might be up your alley.
I think you're mixing metaphors here. We've got shores, we've got nautical theme, we've got alleys. I think this is getting problematic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So the other game by Kids Logic is another Reiner Knizia reprint, this time of a game originally published in 1996 when it was called Palmyra. The more commonly available version is called The Motley Fools Buy Low, Sell High. Unlike Battle of Mekaverse, though, this Kids Logic Reiner Knizia joint, called Trading Titans, is not a redevelopment at all, but a straight reprint. The fundamentals of the game have not changed. This is purely a cosmetic reskin. The cosmetic reskin is of anthropomorphic bulls and bears. Do you get it? Bulls and bears? An economic game? Stock game?
Stock market.
Yeah,
bulls and bears.
The bulls, the bears.
Pit!
Yes, Walker observed that there ought to be a bell in Trading Titans.
Wouldn't do anything. You just ring it randomly.
Any game could be improved probably by having a bell available. Certainly it would help drive people away if they were misophonic. But at any rate, Trading Titans or Palmyra or Buy Low, Sell High is a very simple, very straightforward stock game in the vein of somewhat more minimalist Knizia games. So what you're able to do on your turn is you buy and or sell some stocks from 3 different, they're not even companies in this version, but they're basic industries like real estate or banking or technology. And then you must play a card. And the entire board is full of cards. You end the year, and that might influence the price of various stocks. It might trigger a dividend payout or what have you. And so one of the things that I was very appreciative of, though, because a lot of stock games don't end up to be sufficiently fluid for my taste. Like, you get locked in. You're sunk into a position, and you're just not really in a position to pivot. Now, some of them manage to do this even when you're allowed to sell stocks. But I was actually very pleasantly surprised by the amount of dynamism that was in Trading Titans. Like, for example, I started out very prominently in red, and then I basically shorted it about 2/3 of the way through the game. And so my fortunes used to be tied to red, then it was tied to green, and then I got out of red entirely, and then I tanked it more or less deliberately for a variety of reasons. Again, not particularly super strategic. Like, a lot of it is the result of accidental collusion with other people at the table, because you don't know what cards other people have in their hands. And the dividends can be huge, but in order for the dividends to get really huge, a whole bunch of people need to be contributing the right cards at the right time. But then you all need to be similarly invested in all the same stocks. And so at that point, the payouts don't necessarily often serve to differentiate your standing from somebody else. It's a whole thing. It's very light, very quick, very approachable rules-wise. And I found it very pleasant. I'm generally predisposed towards enjoying even the simpler Reiner Knizia games, but it certainly wasn't as stodgy or as static or as double-down inducing as a lot of other stock games are. So I found it to be a relatively pleasant experience. What about you, Walker?
It was fine. I can see where, like, different games will play much differently. Like, in our game, we had maxed out every stock at its full...
That was a bit troubling.
Full amount, so it was like sort of like, well, you know, that sort of blocked the game. I can see where it wasn't shining the way it should, because it was like, well, we've maxed everything out, and then it became a sort of who's going to sell first type thing before.
It was more about timing than the overall valuation.
Because normally at the end of the game you sell all your stocks, but then it was suddenly, well, the stocks are maxed out now, so selling the stocks during the game seemed a lot more profitable than waiting till the end. So even though there wasn't a whole lot of movement in the overall stock price of the industry, there was still some timing considerations by virtue of just how the fundamental price floats work. So again, I was satisfied by that, but I agree with you. The overall dynamic where the stocks start at a certain baseline price and they all just went up inexorably was just a function, I think, of the fact that everyone was invested in them relatively equally at various times, and a certain amount of conservatism that followed from that. Yeah, I don't know. I would hope that in other games it doesn't shake out the same way. You're right that was a somewhat regrettable dynamic. That was Trading Titans, originally Palmyra, designed by Reiner Knizia. Kids Logic 2024. Get one of the older editions. I'm sure the secondary market is flooded with a bunch of those versions. You could even probably proxy one of your own if you really wanted to. But I've been meaning to try it for years. I've been hearing various people opine about this slightly heavier than filler weight game by Reiner Knizia, and I'm pleased to have tried it. I thought it was cute. It was a good time. Trading Titans. You were nice enough to bring us Ta Wars.
Is that how it's said? I've been going through a string of missed puns lately. So it's towers. But nobody. So it's towers, but people don't say wers. The world wers, but it's towers. It's Ta Wars.
Ta Wars.
Anyway, sorry.
The Dice Tower game, designed by
Luca Caltabiano,
and published by Board&Dice. This is something.
It's a thing?
Every player gets this medium-sized, but
for a dice tower,
but
it's
chunky
small.
enough. Yeah, it's a small dice tower.
For a board game component, it's huge.
It's chunky.
It's very.
It has
chunky.
nice weight to it, and you put out this very large board that is divided up in different sort of
irregularly shaped,
but for getting different types of resources. So there's like crystal area and different wooded areas and cities and mountains. You're going to be moving your dice tower around, dropping dice out of it, trying to get resources depending where the dice fall. You're going to get resources for those, or deciding to attack other towers. And so dice have to go through the tower and hit the other towers. And you're trying to accomplish these goal cards. And much to my dismay, you have to finish them in different terrain types as depicted on the cards. I think it is great for what it is. It is very interesting. You know, you're dropping dice. I think in future plays, it'll play more smoothly because it's very basic rule set. Dropping the dice, getting the resources, accomplishing the gold cards, attacking other players. I think it's just silly fun.
Yeah, I was disappointed by Towers, or Towers, I don't know. I don't know how to say it, Walker. Part of it is the rules ambiguities. The rulebook leaves a lot to your imagination in a way that's okay. We were just fine powering through and just stipulating for the purposes of play. It is a lot less dynamic than I hoped it was going to be. Because, yes, you're forced to move your tower around so it's to satisfy different missions, but it is very lucrative for you to attack other towers, and it is trivially easy to attack a tower that is later in turn order than you by just parking right next to them and just sitting there. And just every turn you attack them, and they attack you, and you both profit as a consequence. There are ways, if you get the exact right cards at the exact right time, in the exact right way, to pull off a daring maneuver whereby you could maneuver to their rear and then spin around and then start chucking dice at them. I would have liked to see that. As it is, it's just theoretical. I was just looking at the way the missions are. It's like, oh wait, if I pulled that mission at the right time and cashed it in at just the right moment, then I'd set myself up next round for something potentially maybe cool. So, I like the fundamental conceit of towers. It's not quite dexterity, but it's got this analog chunkiness to it, this analog element of irregular areas and movement sticks and the dice land where they land, and that's the kind of resource they can harvest, and all that's really cool, and the components are very toyetic, but the fundamental engine, certainly in terms of getting to victory, did not inspire me in the least. I think the length was okay, but the other thing that's worth emphasizing is that this is a game with a very, very coarse scoring system. It's first to 5 points wins, and the tiebreaker is obnoxious because the tiebreaker is sudden death, where everyone who's not eligible for victory gets to keep playing, but only to help determine who. It's an open invitation to kingmaking. It is such a grotesque invitation to kingmaking that we were all so disgusted by it that we just made up our own tiebreaker condition and went on with our lives.
Yeah, but how many games are like this, right? Where they have a great idea and the gameplay is great, but then when they, try to finish it, it just falls apart.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's one of the reasons. It's one of those things that it's a novelty that I was very curious to see. And every once in a while, a game like that comes together, and you get that beautiful hybrid monstrosity where everything actually works. Whether it works in the form of being able to play with toys like Snapship Tactics, whether it works in terms of dexterity, something along the lines of a SEAL Team Flicks or of a Flick Fleet, or whether it's something else. But ultimately, as it is, you've got these toys, you've got this gimmick for how the toys to work in the context of the game, but the victory conditions and everything else just don't really lean into that fun in the same way. And so I was perfectly pleased to try it, but I'm not particularly inclined to go back. I think that this is the kind of thing you might be able to fix with an expansion or a second edition, maybe. Like, there's something there. There's a core there. It's one of those things that's clever and fun to mess around with, but it doesn't hang together particularly well. And I have to say, for what it's worth, I could do with fewer board game media personalities becoming board game publishers. So, that's Ta Wars, Dice Tower game by Luca Vince Caltabiano, published by Board&Dice. Lovely pieces, though.
Very nice. We also played some duos, and we also played some llama dice, just to round out what we've been playing.
It's true. We did have an interesting session of llama dice where there was an unusually pronounced string of good luck for some of the players.
And bad luck for others.
Yeah, an unusual amount of busting and an unusual amount of going out, I gotta say. But such is the nature of Don't Llama Dice. Sometimes the llama gifts you with good fortune, and sometimes the llama spits in your face. Went back to Things in Rings. This is by Allplay and Peter C. Hayward. This is a party game where we've only played the co-op version. There's a competitive version, but we haven't touched it. And you lay out some number of rings in a Venn diagram type arrangement, and every ring has a condition attached to it. Like a couple of examples we had from our game was the word is exactly 5 letters long, or it is an object that can be found in an office, or it is an object that has some wood in it, or what have you. And the job of the other players who do not know what those conditions are is to get rid of their hand of cards by successfully putting objects like a nail, or a hammer, or a balloon, or a rainbow, or a lion into the appropriate areas. And the one person called the Knower.
The All-Knower.
No, you added something there. Just the Knower determines whether or not it has been placed appropriately. I have come to terms, I feel like I've grown as a person. I've come to terms with the red ring. The red ring is context. And again, one of the examples from our sessions today could be found in an office. The knower has to very clearly, and understand for all of the rings, but for the red ring especially, just decide. Just make a decision. It is not the case that the knower is merely just effectuating clear criteria. They have to construct the criteria as play evolves to a certain extent. Now, will some people who are very concerned about the fairness or balance of cooperative games find this difficult to do? Well, maybe, but it's something you're just going to have to get over, because as was observed, one issue that Huey had to make a decision was, can a nail be found in an office? Well, the answer is clearly yes and no. There are nails in offices, but the question is, in your average office scenario, if you stood in the middle of this office, looked left, looked right, and shouted to the assembled, can someone lay their hands on a nail and give it to me in the next 5 seconds? Most offices, the answer is no. So Huey ended up saying no, even though he didn't feel good about it. I feel like that is the kind of legitimate call that you have to make when playing Things in Rings. And as I say, I feel like personal growth, I'm getting slightly more sanguine, greater degree of equanimity about making those evaluations. What we also had, though, was a run in which Chip the Third, not really knowing how, managed to win the game almost single-handedly. Because here's the thing about Things in Rings. You don't have to guess necessarily what the rings are. You just need to put cards in the appropriate place. And so what we got, I think it was fair to say, we kind of inferred what one of the conditions was, but the other 2 conditions we had a vague vibe. And the vibe was kind of naturesy. That was enough. So Chip the Third played out all those cards and we were good to go. So that part feels a little unsatisfying, frankly.
Yeah, you can luck a win, and we did. But the good part is that you can quickly reset and start again, which we did.
This is fair. This is absolutely fair, and this is once again an example of our gravitating towards a co-op game, especially wherever the rules are ambiguous. That ambiguity that I'm so comfortable with now, or more comfortable with now, I'm not perfectly comfortable with it now. I would feel much, much less comfortable with it in a competitive environment, because there, the knower has to make the game run, but is also a participant in competing for victory, so that seems weird. Wouldn't want to play that way, frankly. No. I'd be willing to give it a try, I suspect, but I have some doubts. So that is Things in Rings, Peter C. Hayward, published by Allplay in 2024. And those are the games we played last week. we now take a quick break to pay some bills. And we're back with the news and why it doesn't matter. Let us begin with a bit of a blast from the past. There's a game called Lifeboat. Now, whenever I say this, people are like, oh, yeah, classic. No. Lifeboat. Not lifeboats. Lifeboats is the game where you're voting about whether or not various people can be on various lifeboats. Lifeboat is the game where you pummel people on your lifeboat. There's a certain amount of politics involved. I mean, the theme is more or less the same, except there's a single boat. You occupy a character. You're secretly in love with one character. You secretly hate another character. You want one of those characters to die. You want another one of those characters to survive. You may hate yourself, in which case you're a psychopath and you want everyone to die. It's a whole thing. And there's this entire system of someone navigating and people rowing and trying to get to shore. It is very vicious, very cutthroat. I enjoy Lifeboat. There is a new edition up on Kickstarter right now with all the expansion material involved and some component redevelopments. It's relatively inexpensive. It originally started as just a card game, but now there's a bit, kind of an unnecessary board and things like that. You got to zhuzh things up for the crowdfunding version, of course. This is by Jeff Siadek, and I've always enjoyed Lifeboat. The only misgiving I have about the game, frankly, is that because you're playing with N players and you deal out the secret loves and hates of all the players, the moment somebody gets themselves, that increases the likelihood of other people getting themselves. And if you have too many psychopaths in the boat, things can go very, very, very badly for how the game works. So the incentive structure can be somewhat precariously balanced at times. That having been said, I find that Lifeboat, albeit an imperfect design, is very enjoyable. I am pledged for the new version. I'll talk more about it during Pledge of Indifference this week. That is Lifeboat by Jeff Siadek.
I think it's going to get confusing because I'm pretty sure Renegade is putting out a new edition of Lifeboats.
Yeah,
at the same time.
That's why I started by disambiguating. People get confused between Lifeboat and Lifeboats all the time. Lifeboats is definitely the more widespread, widely known design, but I'm calling attention to Lifeboat.
I think I've been weirded out by expansions lately because we've been getting expansions for older games lately. And I think it's just because of crowdfunding. You get all your expansions at the same time.
Yeah.
So getting expansions 2 or 3, which is the way it used to be, seems odd.
Sure.
And that being said, Underwater Cities Data Era is going to be a new expansion for Underwater Cities. So those people that enjoy playing Underwater Cities by Vladimir Suchy is going to get more of stuff.
CGE is a bit of an exception. CGE is very good at supporting their product lines. I can't help but notice that they also have another expansion for the, I think now, 3rd edition of Galaxy Trucker as well. And now I'm a little bit disappointed because now they have the volume of new things in the new edition of Galaxy Trucker is now non-trivial. And as someone who is now someone who is a very, very big fan of Galaxy Trucker, I'm looking at my complete 2nd edition and wondering if I need to make the jump. It's awkward. It's awkward, Walker. Don't judge me. Finally, another reminder that open registration has begun for SVWAG, a.k.a. Congrès, So Very Wrong About Games, Fun Times, Good Vibes Only, Trans Rights or Human Rights Board Game Jamboree. So if you can join us from July 25th to the 27th in Kingston, Ontario, please do drop by our Eventbrite page or our Patreon page, and you can get registration there. There is room for people who wish to join us. I've decided that we need to have some musical guests, and so these are the official invitations for Buckethead, Chaka Khan, and Olivia Rodrigo.
Very nice selection.
None of them will be there, but they are invited. So for enthusiasts of Buckethead, Chaka Khan, and Olivia Rodrigo, join us for Congress over Wrong About Games, Fun Times, Good Vibes Only, Trans Rights and Human Rights Board Game Jamboree.
Yeah, we can talk about how great it would have been if they had showed up.
It's true. We can play some of their music. There's been some discussion about whether or not the Overlords, Apotheoses, and Commissioners should have entrance music. We might have to try to brainstorm some entrance music situation going on.
Agreed.
SVWAG, July 25th to the 27th. Looking forward to it.
And that is the news, and why it doesn't matter. Now on to the topic of
How
the week.
amazing would it be if Chaka Khan were at SVWAG? Like, seriously. I'm being serious now.
He just, strolls in. I heard I got an invite.
Yeah. Like, you're sitting down. You're going to play Hansa Teutonica. You're going to play with Huey, Chip the Third, and Chaka Khan.
Yeah. And she comes in, with a giant bundle of games.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it turns out, she shows up and is like, actually, I think Lacerda's best work was 5 years ago. It's like, what is happening? That was so great. I would lose my mind. All right, on to the topic. Topic is tricky edge cases, or the subtitle in my head, One Weirdness Too Far. Because here's the thing, as I was considering the various things that I think are emblematic of the tricky edge case that is particularly problematic, and that is a lot of games live and die by exceptions. A lot of rules are themselves exceptions to generalities. Almost every game published now has some degree of special powers or special combos or special abilities, and they are by definition usually game-breaking exceptions. But then there are the exceptions that just don't work, that they stick out like a sore thumb, and you're like, why is this here? What does this do again? I can't remember how this works. Why is this a thing? What are we doing? Where am I? What's my name? Who's Chaka Khan? So, Walker, what was the example that inspired this topic that we were playing?
Well, we decided to play some Leviathan Wilds again. And so we get out these very nice wooden tokens for focus.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh yeah, focus.
Yeah, focus.
That just never happens.
It's the kind of thing where, because there's a relatively sizable token devoted to it.
And a spot on your player board.
And a depression and a hole in your board for it. And almost everybody, frankly, that is taught the game, when you remember to explain focus, they're then like, okay, so how do you become focused? Because it looks like it should just be a default. It's not a default action. It exists in a vanishingly small proportion of cards. And so in what is otherwise a very simple game, it's put right in your face, and it almost never matters, and so it leads to shocking amounts of confusion. It's so weird. I don't know why they made it that way. Why did they make it that way? Like, it's already the case that the designers of Leviathan Wilds felt entitled to introduce new sets of components for specific characters or for specific professions. But they felt the need to have this generalized, quote-unquote, core mechanism that almost never obtains. I don't get it. You don't get it either, do you?
I don't.
It's too weird. I don't get it. So, I have a couple examples of games that thrive on weird nonsense and lots of strange things. Because there's a lot of asymmetry in Leviathan Wilds, but not a lot of it is particularly outside-the-box weird nonsense. Like, the characters do their own things, and they have their own effects, and they have personality, but it's not way outside the bounds of a core set of combinations. That having been said, you can go the one step too far. And I'd like to identify a couple of instances of this. One of them is there's this worker placement game called Mecanisburgo, which I have a soft spot in my heart for. It is a Spanish design. It is a future dystopian thing. There are assassins, there's parties, there's death races, there's a whole bunch of things, but it's fundamentally a worker placement design.
You and I did play it once.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember. And there's a lot of rules exceptions and a lot of sub-mechanisms, like how does assassination work? It's like, well, you do this thing and this other thing. All of that I'm willing to put up with, frankly. I respect the fact that a lot of people aren't. It's a lot. Mecanisburgo has a lot of exceptions. The problem is that in the massive deck of cards of various assistants or robots or personalities that you can acquire, there is a small number of people who, when you put them in your board of directors, completely obviate the normal victory conditions of the game and introduce an entirely new victory condition. Each of them unique to that card. And they're all very specific. They're like, well, if you have this guy and 4 other robots and 1 robot who's a doctor, well then, you can do the following thing. And they're all like that. And it's impossible to keep in your head the prospect of these 4 or 5 other victory conditions entirely. And the problem is, and again, that would be fine. Normally in the game, there's tons of weird stuff that can happen. Like, there's a threat that shows up. It's like, oh, well, this is the weird Godzilla equivalent. He starts marching through the map, destroying things. And the proper response to that is, hey, that's kind of cool. The trick is, though, it doesn't completely upend the game and completely change the parameters of everything you've been doing up till that point. And so that's the part where it's like, I love you, Mecanisburgo, for your weirdness, but that's the one step too far, and it's one of the things that completely just saps the ability to understand the game state.
Well, there's 2 other games that come to mind quickly. Is that there's the Dune, of course, right? If you're the one faction that can guess who's going to win, and then there's the other game that we played just recently, which is Rebirth, right? The Reiner Knizia game, where if you play the Ireland side, if 2 people tie for winning, then it's whoever controls this one particular place, but not between the people that are winning.
Yeah.
It could be any of the players that they control this one particular castle,
yeah.
Then they win. even though they don't have the most points. I thought it's crazy.
I would like to issue a defense of those two particular instances. I will defend Dune because the Bene Gesserit win is very simple to remember. There's only one victory condition in Dune, and then there's only one way for that victory condition to be obviated. It's very simple. I haven't played the game in over a decade, and I still remember exactly how the victory conditions work, so that's an indication of how simple they are. And as far as the rebirth victory condition, it is so gonzo and so out of left field, but admittedly, it's a game where the scores are easily in the triple digits, and so the prospect of a tie is so remote. But I agree with you; it's so strange.
That's why I have some silly thing. Like, tons of games have weird rules for breaking ties.
Yes,
but so many of them go up to 500, 600 points that ties are never happen. So why even have those rules?
Yep, absolutely.
One of the rules I have is in Orleans. I often get asked, because one of the strategies is to put out discs into areas just to get them out of your bag. And then someone will ask, well, how can I get those discs back? So I explain to them, like, well, when you draw discs out of your bag, instead you can just bring those discs back down and use them again. And they say fine, and they stay where they are, and they just keep drawing discs from their bag and just eventually use them anyway. So it's this weird rule that, people always forget that you can just, take those discs back, but they never do it because one of the main things is to get more discs into your bag.
Yeah, that seems like it's a corollary of our frequent complaint about expansion boards. The moment they're over there, they're so easy to forget. And you have this closed ecosystem of discs normally in the context of Orléans. So the moment they're somewhere else, you can be reminded that you can bring them back. But it's like, but they go in and out of my bag. That's just how it works. I hear you. The other one weirdness too far that I was going to mention before you so cruelly cut me off and called me a nerd was there's another game that's about as weird as Mechanisburgo that someday I maintain I'm going to subject you to. You'll probably hate it, but I love it. It's called Bushido der Weg des Krieger, and it's a strange little troops on a map game where I've talked about this before on the show. It is a representation of various times of feudal Japan, and it's a role selection game where when it's your turn, you are trying to acquire territory, but you assign somebody to go lead the attack for you. So I say, Walker, go conquer Dewey's territory for me. And you have this complicated incentive structure whereby, obviously your first inclination would be to throw the fight, because why would you want to go conquer something for me? But there's a whole bunch of complicated incentive structures that dovetail with all of that already is kind of baroque and a little bit complicated and a little bit strange to internalize. But then on top of that, there's the combat resolution mechanism, which is you devote a certain number of troops, so far straightforward. You devote a certain number of secondary resources, so far so straightforward, and then you select a tactic, which is based on a rock, paper, scissors mechanism. Okay, fine-ish. And if you, quote-unquote, win the rock, paper, scissors, the resources you devoted towards the fight are effectively doubled. All of this is true unless both sides pick duel as their tactic. So there's duel, ambush, and frontal assault. All right? Ambush beats duel because you send out your one swordsman to go out and fight the duel, and he's ambushed by a bunch of ninjas. That doesn't work. Duel beats frontal assault, because if you send your entire army out and there's one hyper chad standing blocking the bridge, well, you look stupid. But by the same token, if you send your ambush of ninjas and it's an entire column of soldiers, that's not going to go very far. Anyway, setting all that aside. So it's rock, paper, scissors. It kind of sort of makes sense. But if both players pick duel, you set aside all the normal combat rules, and you resolve the combat through some other weird combat resolution mechanism. So having had to explain this game a number of times to people, and they're on board, and they're getting all the weirdness, it's like, all right, okay, I think I get it. It's like, okay, but if both players throw duel, it's this entire other thing. At that point, I can see the life drain from their eyes, and I've lost many a player at that point. And like many of the things we're pointing out, in this case, it's kind of a trap rules explainer. Either you lay all this stuff out and risk overwhelming people, or you leave it out, in which case halfway through the game you get to say, oh, okay, everything you thought you knew is wrong. It's just, there's no good way to do it. Anyway.
My next example is money. Like in Great Western Trail, when you forced to pay something and you can't, then that's just fine. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And there's a strategy behind that. When you realize you have to go through a certain area and you're going to have to pay someone money, just make sure you spend it
you're
first.
broke at the time, yeah.
But there's so many other games that go through these convoluted rules of when you need to pay and you
Yep.
can't, but you're just never out of money. It's just something that never happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The exact same thing is true of breaking promises in Sidereal Confluence. The rules for punishing someone for breaking a promise, they exist, but they're almost never invoked. Because, again, that's not the vibe of the game. Like, you don't knife people in Sidereal Confluence. It doesn't make any sense. But sometimes people insist on, it's like, okay, well, what exactly happens? I've never seen it happen. The designer says, I think in all the times he's played the game, he's seen it needed to be enforced a small number of times. But nonetheless, it's there, and it just kind of nags at you in the back of your head.
Another thing that is in rules a lot is there's rules. What will happen when a player is eliminated from the game? This just happened in Allplay, but it's something that just never happens in a lot of these games. Like,
Right.
it's almost impossible. Like, there's lots of games where it's easy for someone to get eliminated, but
Yeah.
there's games where it's almost impossible, yet they have these, long-winded rules about what to do when someone is eliminated.
Yeah, it turns out, and the problem is when you're first reading the rule book, it can be difficult to know how likely that situation is. We had the exact same situation with towers, where it says, look, if you lose your last point of life, either the player is eliminated or here's the rules to prevent that. And I'm like, both of these look unsatisfying. Let's hope that it doesn't show up. And sure enough, what they should have said in the rulebook, frankly, is this is probably not going to happen if the game shakes out the way you would expect it to shake out. So fortunately, it didn't rear its ugly head. But that's the whole thing. Like, there are these rules. They almost never rear their ugly heads, but you have to grapple with them. There's a category of ones that come up in a game you love and a game you loathe. And that is what happens when the deck runs out. Not just shuffle the discards back into the deck, but there's no room in the discards either. They're all gone. This can happen in Gnar, this can happen in Cosmic Encounter, and this can happen in Tribune. They almost never do, but they might. And the rules there are basically... this is a gross oversimplification, but they're basically whack everyone upside the head, everyone sheds a whole bunch of cards, everyone's tableaus get murderized, and that gives you enough cards to form a deck. But on a number of occasions, particularly in the last time you played Gnar, someone's like, wait, what happens if the deck runs out? It's like, oh, were you saving your tableau for something? You're in trouble. And the same is true in Cosmic Encounter and Tribune. If you're hoarding cards for a specific reason, not even necessarily unreasonably, just in the sense that, turn 3 is the turn you're gathering cards, turn 4 is the turn you cash them in. Well, if the deck runs out in turn 3, you're boned. And I've seen it happen, I think, once in Cosmic Encounter, once in Tribune. I don't think I've ever seen it happen in Gnar, but it's desperately unsatisfying when it happens. Because, again, it's the thing. The deck starts getting out and you look it up, it's like, okay, guys, fair warning. You might be in serious trouble if this thing happens.
I also hate, in Terraforming Mars, they give you this counter to track the number of turns. And we're always wondering, there's so many cards, like I'm sure cards are going to come up soon that it matters what turn it is. But it turns out it only matters in solo rules. But still, they put it in the main rule book, track the number of turns.
Solo rules, the existence of solo rules, by virtue of mentions in the rulebook, specialized components, icons on cards, iconography on the board that doesn't matter for anything other than solo rules, have led to so much misdirection and so many thoughts about, is this a weird sub-mechanism that I'm missing? Is this something that's really... I really wish that in every rulebook, where there was a solo mode with components or graphical flourishes that only matter for the solo rules, they flag that in the main rulebook. These are the things you ignore when not using the solo rules.
Agreed.
Because, fundamentally what we're getting at is these are just strange edge cases that cause confusion. And the iconography to support the solo rules that don't have anything to do with the normal multiplayer game is kind of a close cousin.
All right, are we ready for the bits yet? All right, for the first bit. Rules for 6-player versions. Who needs those? We're not going to use those rules. Why print them?
It depends on the game.
Nope. And then there's rule books that talk about
Cosmic Encounter is great.
Jade for scoring. Like, that's garbage.
Oh, that kind of bit. I'm sorry. I didn't know what kind of bit you were talking. Please continue with the bit. I'm sorry. I'm there. I'm in with
and
the
then
bits.
There's these other rules that reference Surindir. Like, no one does that. Those are waste of time rules as well.
Sure. The part where I saved this for the end, this is my last category of things, because it's the least forgivable. It's where these weird, tricky corner edge cases apply to victory conditions. When I have to repeatedly look up how to win, chances are excellent I'm not having a good time, right? And this is true of so many war games. So many historical war games, because they want to model the way things actually happened, and they want to represent, not entirely unlike what we talked about in Rebirth, that this cathedral was super effing important in the context of history. They're like, okay, well, if you've conquered this place or a region next to it, but you don't control this other place, and the other...
but your king is dead, but your prince is alive, but he didn't marry yet, and they didn't have children, but the 2 children they had, they were both girls, unfortunately, and one became a priest, but the priest got to a certain level, and that,
Yeah, so this is one of the main reasons why I'm not really down with coin games. Coin games are infamous for having these kinds of nested conditional victory conditions that people are constantly saying, wait, so how is that a minor victory or a major? What if Napoleon's Conquests, I don't know if you remember this. A few months ago, we played that multiplayer Napoleonic worker placement game, and I liked almost everything about it mechanically, but the victory conditions were weird and tough to remember. And it's just a thorn in the side of it. I'm willing to put up with a lot of weird nonsense in a game, a lot of weird exceptions, a lot of corner cases, a lot of strange interactions. But at the point where it's the victory condition itself, please keep that as simple as possible. This is one of the reasons why card-driven historical war games are so popular, because you can build in any number of weird corner cases into card play. Like, you don't need a whole subsection of rules about the formation of NATO. Twilight Struggles, make NATO a card.
That's right.
There you go. It does what it says on the card.
You form NATO. Congratulations.
It tells you what NATO does. There you go. You're good. Another example from a game I absolutely adore is in Successors. You could have had a whole bunch of sub-mechanisms about how the silver shields work, or you can have how the silver shields work on a card. At the start of the game, there are no silver shields. Someone plays the card. Now you have this unit. They're an elite unit. They have the stats on the tile. And then suddenly the card shifts and it's a surprise card now, and the silver shields might change position and betray you in the middle of a fight. It's all on the card. You're fine. Now, in terms of ideal strategic play, you might want to give a heads up to the person who just recruited the silver shields. Well, they're safe for this round, but you never know what might happen next round. Sure, fine. That's all right. But they can even realize that because it, again, says on the card they just played, and they understand how this works. So you can have any number of weird, tricky edge cases, and it won't be as toxic to the nature of the game as these other weird, tricky edge cases that we're talking about.
Hidden in a rulebook.
Hidden in a rulebook that almost never come up, but when they come up, people want to know how they work, and then you feel bad for not having told them about it, and it completely upends the game, whatever. But if you built it into a whole bunch of cards, well then, that's great. It gives you the flexibility to have all these weird corner cases that you want, and it's not as tricky, it's not as confusing, it doesn't feel as unfair. It makes you feel like you're on a great history ride, rather than some sort of end game reveal that's unsatisfying. That's going to do it for this week. Play more historical war games, Walker.
I will.
Do it.
I promise.
Do it.
If you have interesting rule edge cases, feel free to type them up in the guild and or our Discord, and I would like to see them.
Yeah, I'm curious too. Because it's again, we were inspired by this while playing Leviathan Wilds, because Leviathan Wilds is so simple and such a clean rule set. And then there's this weird universe where focus is a thing. Anyway.
Except it's not.
Except that it's not. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, as always, take care of yourselves. Self-care is an obligation. Take care of your hobby. And thank you, Rules Explainer. We hope to see you again soon.
Peace!
You've been listening to So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games produced by Michael Walker and edited by Mark Bickman. You can find all our information at SoWrongGames.com. Special thanks to What Does It Eat for allowing us to use their most excellent song, FOS, as our intro. You can find them at WhatDoesItEat.com. We hope to see you again soon, and as always, try to be right, but remember, you're so very wrong.